Danny attempted to make as little noise as possible as she carried her sleeping son up the stairs to her apartment. Aiden had spent most of the day at Monique's after being picked up from preschool. A day of running around in the snow and a half a glass of hot chocolate had her little man down for the count. Danny stroked Aiden's head and looked to see if his eyes were still closed before she reached into her pocket to grab her keys. Too many nights were spent like this one, Aiden asleep in her arms before she got to spend any time with him. Of course, being the star of Infernal Passion wasn't helping things in that department. Lately, it seemed she was consumed with little else but perfecting her lines and polishing her voice. As if that wasn't enough, kissing Ryder had sent her into a complete tailspin. Danny's hands trembled as she unlocked the door. As she caught sight of the couch Ryder had spent nearly every night on since they'd gotten married, the wrinkled sheets and tossed about pillows, her heart beat a little faster. Thinking about that kiss scared the hell out of her, and it wasn't because she'd hated it. On the contrary, it had been nice. Oh God, who was she kidding? It had probably been the sexiest kiss she'd ever engaged in. Ryder Nathanson, a man who blackmailed her twice, had the most incredible lips she'd ever tasted. All she could seem to think about was what it would be like to taste them again. Danny quickened her pace. Relieved to see she appeared to be the first one home, she brought Aiden into his room and laid him on his bed. She doubted she'd get much sleep tonight, but she was grateful her son was too little to understand the things going on around him. She would die if he knew she'd enjoyed kissing a man who took pleasure in trying to ruin people's lives. As she fumbled around, Danny attempted to steady her racing heart. Though there sure as hell wasn't going to be an encore, she couldn't help thinking that the situation with Ryder was starting to remind her of the one with Philip Cameron, except this was so much worse because she hadn't known how bad Philip really was. And Philip had been a boy. Ryder was a man, a crazy man. There was no telling how far he would go to get the things he wanted. There was darkness inside of him. But the more time they spent together, the less Danny saw of that darkness. There was a vulnerable side to Ryder, and a part of her seemed to be drawn to that side. Finding him in the cafe that day, she'd wanted to take him in her arms and comfort him the way her parents had her when she was a little girl. She had no idea what Ryder had been upset about that day, but she'd wanted to wrap her arms around him and hold him until his fears were gone. And that kiss. God, that incredible kiss. She kept telling herself she thought it was Liam beside her. Liam, her dear friend, who had remained her friend even after she'd done the most reprehensible thing to him. Liam, whom she'd dreamed of being in a relationship with since she first came to Rayburn Theater. But the harder she tried to believe it, the more convinced she became that she'd known it was Ryder all along, Ryder's heat, which hadn't frightened her, but had aroused her as nothing ever had. Shaking like a tree in the middle of a hurricane, Danny changed Aiden into his pajamas. She drew his blanket to his shoulders, kissed his forehead, and shut the door behind her. Back in the living room, Danny plopped onto the couch. As she lifted her weary head, the lit lamp on the table beside her caught her attention. She'd been so distracted when she entered the apartment earlier, she hadn't even realized the light was on. Had she left the lamp on all day? Figuring it was best to turn it off now in hopes of preserving the bulb, she reached for the switch. She was about to flick it off when a pair of feet shuffled behind her. "Ryder!" Danny gasped. "How long have you been standing there?" Ryder, who was wearing nothing besides a pair of jeans, stepped into the light. "Long enough." Ryder's pecs glistened in the dim lighting, and as he sat beside her, Danny caught a strong whiff of alcohol on his breath. Her husband, whose mouth she had just been giving a considerable amount of thought to, was half naked, but she was drawn to his eyes, which were dark and glassy. Their owner seemed distracted, lost. She wondered what could be weighing on him that was making him so upset. "Hey." Ignoring the voice in her head that was telling her it was the worst idea ever, she slid closer and asked, "What's wrong?" Ryder shrugged. "Like you care." "Of course I don't care. It's just, you are living here, and we are married to each other. I thought maybe whatever was bothering you, you might want to talk about it." When he didn't answer, she went on, "You seem really out of sorts, like you did that day at the Moonbeam Cafe." Arms crossed, Ryder turned toward her and asked in a slurred voice, "Are you always this nosy?" "Excuse me?" "I suppose we could always ask Oakley Sutherland. Come to think of it, I guess we can't do that, can we?" "I'm not sure what you're getting at." Danny's voice quivered, "but I despised Oakley. I never wanted anything to do with him." Ryder lifted an eyebrow. That's strange, considering the man was getting between your legs on a nightly basis. Danny's heart slammed against her ribs. Rage blazed through her at the thought that she could possibly enjoy kissing this man, or that she tried to sympathize with him, this man who'd been every bit as horrible to her as Oakley had, and then some. Her back stiffening, she said in a loud voice, "I guess it's as strange as it is with every man who forces a woman against her will. Yeah," she stared into Ryder's widened eyes. "Yeah, Oakley raped me, you son of a bitch." Danny struggled not to be sick. Tears spilled down her face as she sobbed, unable to stop herself. She began to hyperventilate, and she was desperately trying to get a hold of herself when she caught sight of Ryder, his face pale, his eyes warm with concern. Her heart rate easing a little, Danny attempted a couple of breaths. A hand brushed her back. Looking at Ryder, she shot him a questioning look. "I didn't know," he said. "I'm sorry." Danny nodded. "I'm sure you're not the only one who thought I asked for it. Maybe it was my own fault. I mean, partly, I suppose. I could have left sultry and sensational at any time, only I was too afraid to do it. That's on me, and it always will be. But hey, the story does have a happy ending. I have Aiden, and I wouldn't trade him for anything in the world. You have an amazing son." Danny wiped her eyes. "He's incredible. Thank you." Ryder stood and paced the floor. Stopping in front of the desk where her photo album rested, he asked, "Where are your parents, Danny?" A knot formed in Danny's stomach. She'd never told anyone the whole story about her parents. Her closest friends knew they'd kicked her out. She'd told Kyla about Philip. Both she and Liam knew he'd gotten her pregnant, but she'd kept the most personal details about what he'd done, as well as what her father had done afterward, to herself. Ryder's father had been even more of a monster than her own. Ryder was the last person she wanted to talk to about anything, but maybe with regard to this particular topic, he would somehow understand. "They're not far from here." Feeling the urge to continue, Danny went on, "Though they may as well live on another continent because we haven't spoken in years. My dad was always controlling, but I didn't realize just how bad his temper was until I was in high school." "High school," Ryder echoed. "I was a sophomore when I got pregnant the first time. My father was furious, and he disowned me. As for my mother, well, my mother does whatever my father tells her to, so she disowned me too." "The first time," Ryder blinked. "I don't understand. I miscarried," Danny clarified, fresh tears coming into her eyes. "I'm sorry." "You already said that. Anyway, don't be sorry for me. I'm a survivor. I've been on my own for a long time. It isn't always easy, but I find a way to keep going, and it isn't as though I'm completely alone. I have Aiden, my friends. They're always there for me when I need them." "Like Liam Thompson," Ryder said with a note of bitterness in his voice. Danny gave her half-naked husband a double take. Everyone within 500 miles of Rayburn Theater knew Ryder hated Liam, but this was more than just hatred. She got the feeling Ryder was jealous of him, and she had no idea why that was. "Liam's been a good friend to me," she said. "A good friend you'd like to be more than friends with? I see the way you look at him, that dreamy look you get in your eyes when you think no one is watching. I'll bet you think Liam would make the perfect husband and father to your little boy." Danny scratched her head. Liam was certainly husband material, one of Rayburn Theater's most eligible bachelors, or so the consensus agreed, and he was handsome and talented and more than financially secure, or at least his father was. Danny hadn't deserved him even before she tried to make Liam believe Aiden was his son, but she'd be his in a heartbeat if only he said the word. Why did that matter to Ryder? "Liam could have any woman he wants," she assured him. "And you don't want that woman to be you?" Danny shook her head. "Why are we even talking about this? It's crazy." "Is it? Obviously you have some pretty strong feelings for the guy. Feelings have a funny way of coming out." "I get that you're drunk," Danny supplied, "but isn't this getting just a little off topic?" Ignoring her, Ryder took a framed photograph from the desk, a picture of her, Liam, and Kyla, which had been taken on the opening night of Love's Tragedy several years ago. He glared at Liam as though he were the devil himself. "You've woven a fantasy around Liam Thompson. You believe he's the perfect man, and that he has the ability to make all of your dreams come true." "You're the one who fixed it so I'd be starring in the play with him," Danny reminded him. "I wanted you to star in the play, yes," Ryan muttered. "Having Thompson in the role of William Flannery is one I could have done without." Danny rubbed her aching forehead. Ryder often said things that surprised her, things other people wouldn't say, but this was just ridiculous. If she didn't know any better, she'd swear he was jealous of her feelings for Liam. Except that was crazy. Ryder hated her. He'd kissed her because it had been years since he'd touched a woman, but she was nothing more than a tool to him. Head spinning, Danny went to the sink and poured herself a glass of water. She drank it in hard swallows. As she stared absent-mindedly, her kitchen counter became the stage at Rayburn Theater. Late for work at Sultry and Sensational one night, she'd stood, staring at it. A man stood beside her, a very handsome man. She recognized him, but hadn't been able to place him. Her recollection of the event was a blur in her mind. Remembering that she was in her kitchen, wondering where in the world that flash of memory had come from, Danny shook her head and downed the rest of her water. "I know you and Liam don't get along, but what exactly do you have against him?" Ryder clenched his teeth. "The guy is a silver spoon-fed daddy's boy who thinks the rest of the world should stoop down and kiss his oversized feet. That isn't true. Liam cares about people. He may be a little conceited sometimes, but Liam Thompson isn't the right man for you, Danny." "And you know this how?" Danny demanded after a pause. "Because you've spent 10 minutes actually talking to me and you think it makes you some sort of expert on my life? You think exotic dancing is something women do because they enjoy it. You think my parents are evil because they disown me. Hell, you probably think I'm evil too." His brows lifted. Ryder asked her, "Are you evil?" A chill shot up Danny's spine. Eyeing him carefully, she asked, "What kind of a question is that?" "An honest one. Not everyone has the guts to ask honest questions. We all have a bit of evil inside of us, Danny. It's only a matter of whether or not we decide to let it out." "I don't think that's true." Danny fought to hide the uneasiness in her voice. "You obviously feel the need to justify your own actions, but not all of us have evil inside of us." "You're wrong," Ryder insisted. "You have desires inside of you, needs and longings so dark and forbidden you can hardly bear to admit them, even to yourself." Heat cooled between Danny's thighs. She closed her eyes and then opened them again, becoming suddenly aware of Ryder's breath against the back of her neck. He laid his hands on her shoulders. Danny wanted to move away, but the fire was rising inside of her like the heat of a blazing oven. Her husband's palms glided along her back. He swept her hair to one side and pressed his mouth against her skin. Ryder's lips grazed her neck and ear. Nipping her, he whispered, "Liam Thompson can't fulfill your fantasies, Danny. You don't want to play it safe. You want to lose yourself the way you do when you're on the stage. You want to feel the rush of exhilaration you do when there's danger at hand, temptation so alluring you'll do whatever it takes to have what you crave." Danny breathed in and out. His words coursed through her like a summer breeze, and she couldn't help but surrender to their seductive tone. Opening her eyes, she looked at Ryder's face. Terror rippled through her. She shoved him away. Her entire body shaking, Danny glared at Ryder, who seemed almost as surprised by what had just happened as she was. "I'm not evil. Oakley Sutherland was evil. Say what you will about me, but I know there's a special place in hell for that man." "For my father, too," Ryder agreed. "I have no doubt the two of them are enjoying it as we speak. That doesn't mean it's all black and white for the rest of us." "What are you saying?" Ryder took a lock of her hair between his fingers. "You kissed me, Danny. Me. A man you equate to the devil. If you tangle with the devil and you enjoy it, doesn't that make you—" "I thought you were Liam." "So you say. Only, I'm not entirely sure I believe you. Knowing the object of your affection as well as you obviously do, I'm willing to bet you couldn't imagine your stuffed shirt Romeo kissing you in front of a room full of people the way I did. You didn't pull away. You knew something wasn't right, and you went on kissing me anyway because you couldn't help yourself. I think you want to kiss me again." Ryder closed in on her, the burning in his eyes as hot as the fire deep within her. Danny swallowed, wanting desperately to escape, but having no desire to move away. She wanted Ryder to kiss her again. God help her, she wanted him to kiss her and not to stop. Ryder leaned in, and Danny stepped back, realizing, as she bumped into something solid, that he'd backed her against the wall. He looked at her, as though giving her one last chance to walk away, and when she didn't take it, he thrust his hands into her hair and pressed his mouth against hers. Her husband's tongue was hot and wet, and as it moved deep within her, she came alive in a way she hadn't in years. Her breasts tingled. The hairs on the back of her neck stood at attention. Ryder reached beneath her shirt. He unhooked her bra, and after sliding his hands slowly around to the front, he cupped her aching breasts. Her skin was tender and swollen, and as his large hands stroked her nipples, she moaned his name out loud. Ryder undid the buttons on her shirt. Danny panted, her breath coming in gasps as Ryder gazed at her bare breasts. His face was slick, as though he had a fever. Beautiful. His voice was hoarse. He kissed the sensitive peaks of her breasts and whispered, "So beautiful." His kiss was gentle, but the sensation it ignited was powerful as Ryder's lips and tongue sent a wave of need through her body. "Yes," Danny whispered, the words pouring out of her as though they had a mind of their own. "God, yes." Ryder glided his hands over her belly. He dipped lower, and her skin tingled a little more with every brush of his fingers. She trembled as Ryder reached below the waistband of her jeans. Heart pounding, she bit her lip to keep from crying out as he stroked her upper thigh. Danny quivered as Ryder neared closer and closer to the place where she was dying for him to touch her. His hand grew still. Taking it from beneath her clothing, he smiled. He took several steps backwards. "What are you doing?" Danny asked, breathless. "Why did you—" Her husband's smirk answered her question. Without so much as a backward glance, he turned and left her alone in her kitchen.